I should have said let's refuse.
All right. Well, welcome everyone. Thank you to everyone who's here in person and for those of you who are online. I'd like to begin this evening by acknowledging the traditional owners, the Yidinji people on the lands on which we meet this evening. I'd like to pay our respects to elders past, present and emerging and extend that respect to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples in the room today. I'd also like to acknowledge that sovereignty has not been ceded and we have a long way to go. Welcome. My name's Aisha. I'm the community organiser at the Cairns and Far North Environment Centre, and tonight I am your host. I am only your host this evening, and I'd like to extend a thanks and well done to my colleagues who have organised this event, Bronwyn and Vanessa. Now, we are here today because Council's latest projections show that Cairns is at risk of a drinking water shortfall by 2026. This evening's event aims to discuss practical solutions to the water crisis and ensure the community is informed about any risks and opportunities associated with the proposed solutions. This evening, you will hear from a panel of speakers who will introduce the issue of water security, discuss the proposed solutions, identify risks and opportunities, and talk about how we can learn from other regions as we solve our water security crisis. You will hear from key stakeholders and including traditional owners who will share their knowledge and concerns and provide direct questions to our panel here today. You, as our community, will have the opportunity to direct your questions to the panel during our community Q&A session. And finally, towards the end of this evening, you'll have the opportunity through a community poll to help CAFNEC understand and key decision makers understand where you as the community stand on the proposed solutions that are provided. Now, before we get started, a few housekeeping rules or things. The toilets are located around the side of the building, so if you just walk out this door to the left and round the corner. Now, another thing is that we are having photos this evening, so if you don't want your image released, please at the end of this evening let one of us know at the registration desk. For those of you who are joining us online, I'd ask that you do mute yourself as there is a bit of interference if you remain with your self unmuted. And lastly, while the panel and our stakeholders are speaking, I ask that if you do have questions to save those questions for the community Q&A session. So I'd like to firstly introduce our panel this evening. We have Nigel Parratt, Water Policy Officer at the Queensland Conservation Council, who will be joining us online tonight from Brisbane, who will help us learn from South East Queensland handling of the Millennium Drought. I'd like to introduce Division 1 Councillor Brett Moller and David Stevens, Executive Manager for Major Projects at the Cairns Regional Council, who will speak to us both on the proposed solutions to our water crisis. I would like to introduce Bruce Corcoran at the end there, member of Mulgrave Landcare and Catchment Group and long-term advocate for protection of the Mulgrave Catchment. And then in between there, Bronwyn Opie, community campaigner at the Cairns and Far North Environment Centre, who will be sharing CAFNEC's concerns and recommendations. So I will hand the mic. So unfortunately, a panel speaker of ours from the Water Sensitive Cities Australia is unable to join us this evening. And so we have Bronwyn who will be speaking to us as to what does water security mean. So I'll hand the mic over to Bronwyn now.
Can everybody hear me if I stand here? Is that all right? Okay. All right. So I've got the UN definition of water security on the screen there. As you can see, it is very detailed. Australia doesn't have a national framework for water security. The term is often used in Australia to refer to water availability for use, which is a very narrow focus. of the definition. Australia is the driest inhabited continent in the world. On average, only 12% of rainfall flows into rivers in Australia compared to the 52% in North America. Our rainfall is often highly variable, shifting from periods of drought to flooding rains. Growing population puts pressure on our existing water supplies, both directly and indirectly, and projections show that Australia's current water availability will not meet future demand. The main source of water in cities is surface water, which is like rivers, lakes, accumulated rainwater, as opposed to groundwater, which is drawn from underground streams and aquifers. Climate change is increasing existing variability of rainfall and reducing average rainfall in some areas. So water suppliers and utilities across the nation are looking at ways to save water and increase supply. When demand for water exceeds supply of water, there are two ways to address this issue. There's supply side management and demand side management. Supply side water management works by increasing the amount of available water through finding new sources, increasing storage capacities, or using technology such as desalination. This generally does not place a burden on the users or customers to change their own usage. However, these techniques are often expensive, and this cost burden may end up falling on the consumer through increased rates or taxes. Demand-side water management can be defined as reducing the amount of water that is being used by people for specific purposes, such as residential, industrial, or municipal. To reduce demand, a number of measures can be taken, such as fixing leaky systems, upgrading infrastructure to reduce wastage, financial incentives for use reduction, public education to change user behavior, and knowledge sharing about techniques to reduce demand. Demand management is often far cheaper than supply-side management. However, for it to work, those managing the water resource must take steps to understand how water is being used by the people who depend on the resource, and then work to educate them on best practices to reduce demand. I'll close this little context setting section by emphasizing the importance of education in water management, whether it be on the supply side or the demand side. Comprehensive community education does take a lot of time, and we hope that this evening's event can contribute to that.
I'm just going to check a technical problem. I study at the university here, and when we have an orange light in the lecture theatre, it means we're on pause live. So we're just going to see if you press down on that, Vanessa, on the orange light. All good? Cool. All right. Thank you, Bronwyn. Next, I'd like to hand over to Nigel, who you'll see on the screen there, who will be sharing with us South East Queensland's handling of the Millennium Drought. Thank you, Nigel.
Yeah, thank you very much, and good evening, everybody, and congratulations to CAFNEC for the wonderful
Sorry,
initiative.
Nigel, we can't hear you.
Is that better?
Yeah.
Okay, so I'll start again. So thank you very much for the invitation to have a chat with you and to share learnings from how we manage the millennial drought here in Southeast Queensland. So for those that don't know, the millennial drought basically ran from the 2000 until about 2009. And I suppose the effect here in Southeast Queensland was that our main drinking water dam, Wivenhoe Dam, its supply level dropped very, very rapidly as a result of the drought. And we were heading down at the worst stage to a storage level of around 16% of the dam's capacity. Anything lower than 10% is considered to be dead storage in dams, which is basically toxic water. So it was a real major issue here in Southeast Queensland. And the government did a whole range of both supply side and demand side management in order to address the issue. By far, the most successful measure the government introduced was the demand side management in response to the drought. And that consisted essentially of a really comprehensive community education program to reduce per capita daily usage of water. So prior to the drought, Southeast Queensland on average residents on average were using in excess of 350 litres per person per day. And towards the end of the drought, as a result of that comprehensive community education program, we got down as low as 120 litres per person per day, which is an outstanding success. And given that Brisbane was the first Western city to literally face running out of drinking water, it set a global precedent. So an incredible achievement. And what's happened as a result of the community education that occurred to assist residents reduce their demand was that per capita consumption hasn't rebounded anywhere close to what it was prior to the drought. So as of today, the average daily per capita use in Southeast Queensland is sitting at 150 litres per person per day. So what that really strongly indicates is that with the right sort of education program, community will adopt and embed changed water use behaviours. So what that's essentially meant in that, we've got a far less per capita usage, is that other options to meet water supply shortfalls, such as building new dams and or other water supply mechanisms such as desalination plants and or using recycled water, get pushed into the future quite significantly. So what we've learned here in Southeast Queensland is that reducing demand, as what we did, was the most cost-effective mechanism to address the water shortage that we're facing here as a result of the millennial drought. So along with requiring residents to reduce their per capita demand, the government also reduced the requirement for industry to firstly develop what were then called water use efficiency management plans. And basically there was a requirement placed on all industries to reduce their demand by 25%. Now what that did was, certainly it cost industries, some money to adopt those more efficient water use practices. But in the long run, it's actually turned out that it's saved industry a lot of money by reducing their water usage. So there's been some really, I suppose, long-term benefits from the reduced demand that we brought into effect here in Southeast Queensland, both from an economic and also environmental perspective. What else can I say? So the major issue in regard to new dams as a way to meet looming water shortages is that as a result of climate change, new dams simply are not as reliable as what they once were. So it's a bit of a misnomer that, the only way that we can address looming water shortages is building additional water storage infrastructure. It simply doesn't stack up economically and or from a technical perspective. So given that Cairns region, the daily per capita water usage, from my understanding, is over 400 litres per person per day, and probably in excess of that greatly, there's huge opportunities to save water by introducing demand management strategies that would push the need for augmenting water supply infrastructure way out into the future. So it makes a lot of sense to firstly, as in response to looming water shortages, is to reduce demand. And certainly, what we've achieved here in Southeast Queensland clearly demonstrates that. And in regard to other water supply options, such as building new dams and recycling water and other water supply sources such as desalination. Firstly, they're incredibly costly to bring in. There's all sorts of environmental issues associated with building new dams. And the delay time in getting new infrastructure or water supply infrastructure in place is at least 10-year process to go through all of the necessary approvals processes, and then to basically build new water supply infrastructure. Whereas with introducing demand management, you get a virtual overnight benefit by reducing demand. So once again, it makes a lot of sense to firstly reduce demand as a way to, I suppose, increase water supply security in regional areas. Once again, in Cairns region, huge opportunities to save water by introducing demand management. And once again, based on what we've done here in South East Queensland, it's entirely possible to do that as a first measure. I think I'll leave it there. And happy to answer any questions at the Q&A part of the evening.
Thank you, Nigel. I'll now pass the microphone to Brett, who will speak a little bit about proposed solutions to our water crisis.
Thank you, Aisha, and Bronwyn and Vanessa, and to CAFNEC for hosting the forum and inviting Council here tonight just to talk through our Water Security Strategy Stage 1. Firstly, on behalf of Cairns Regional Council, I'd like to acknowledge and pay our respects to the traditional custodians of the lands covered by JCU's Numa Buddha campus, the Jaragun and Yidinji peoples. We also acknowledge and pay our respects to the traditional custodians of the lands covered by the Cairns Water Security Stage 1 project area, which we'll be discussing here tonight during our presentation, and that's the Dulabed Malanbarra Yidinji, the Gimoy Wallabarra Yidinji, and the Wanjuru Marjay peoples. We extend this respect to all elders past, present and future, and to other traditional custodians and First Peoples present here today and within our region. I'm joined here tonight by Deputy Mayor Councillor Terry James, because we thought it was important as councillors and representatives of the community that we should be here to listen. I certainly have an open mind and looking forward to the presentations tonight to take forward any new ideas or suggestions. But in terms of the technical data, I'm joined here by our officer, David Stevens. He's manager for special projects, and he'll talk through the technical details of the project. Certainly, water security has been an issue for council for a very long time. Back in the 1990s, when Councillor James first came on council, they were talking about Flaky Creek as a supply source. Then we remember the 2008 to 2012 council with Val Shear, where they were considering the Mulgrave aquifer as a source. Subsequent to that, in the 2012 Manning Council in 2014, council looked to create and did create a water security advisory group, WASAG, to map out a water strategy to source both a demand management strategy and an additional source strategy, and there's a number of steps to that. And CAFNEC, and I know Bruce was part of that, and there were, I think, 20-odd stakeholders who met for well over a year. And in 2015, by consensus, all agreed on a water strategy, which was put to council and adopted in 2015. And we're now here in 2022 talking about stage 1 of that project. As I said, part of our discussion tonight will be around the work we have done with demand management, and we've got some data and future projects such as smart water meters and the technical detail that David will talk through that. Obviously, with water and our roles as councillors and as a council, there's very strict legislative requirements to provide a secure and safe water service to our residents. As I said, highly legislated, and a lot of responsibility that goes with that. That's why we need to ensure our planning in terms of the water security going forward is detailed and considered. So in line with all of that, our 2 Cairns survey results, our residents value very highly the protection of our natural environment, and that really guides us in all of our projects going forward. So I'd like to hand over to David now just to step through and give his presentation in regard to our stage 1 of this project. Thank you.
Do it, perfect. So good evening. Obviously, I'm Dave Stevens. Members of our demand management team certainly passed on their apologies. So hopefully I can do a lot of that content justice. But please excuse me if I can't provide comprehensive responses if there's any specific queries. Yep. So just covering off a bit of recent history, again, that there's quite a lot of content in here. So again, forgive me if I appear to be rushing through this, but it's quite a comprehensive story. So the recent history here starts around 2014. As Councillor Moller already mentioned, the Water Security Advisory Group kicked off, otherwise known as WASAG. It was established to consider future water supply options. And in March 2015, WASAG recommended the Cairns Water Security Strategy to Council for endorsement, and that covered short, medium, and long-term solutions. And those key short-term initiatives, in this case, was the demand management and the Cairns Water Security Stage 1 project. In 2015, Council adopted the Cairns Water Security Strategy and that Cairns Water demand management strategy. In terms of Cairns Water Security Stage 1, since 2016, we've commenced a lot of that early planning work, a lot of early concept work, and pre-feasibility assessments. Of course, we've also continued a lot of that demand management implementation, which I'll touch on shortly. But just sticking on WASAG for now. So certainly, again, reiterating Councillor Moller's support, really want to acknowledge and thank the WASAG members who are present here tonight, including the Mulgrave Landcare and Catchment group and CAFNEC. Again, there's been some really robust history here. It also included representation from community sectors. So obviously there's some elected members from Cairns Regional Council, government agencies, Rainforest Aboriginal Peoples Alliance or RAPA, local business groups, community groups, youth groups, and of course environmental groups. WASAG met 12 times over an 11-month period over 2014-2015. So the options that WASAG considered, so there were quite numerous water supply options that were considered. Some of those are potable water demand reduction strategies, the enhancement of the bulk water supply system as it exists currently, sourcing new bulk water sources, new bulk water treatment and reuse plants as well. Certainly there's quite a significant long list and short list of options that were considered. So if you are interested in any of those details further, certainly they're all well outlined in the Water Security Strategy document itself. So at the end of that piece, the Cairns Water Security Strategy was unanimously recommended by WASAG. And the Cairns Water Security Strategy, again, touching on those key short-term initiatives. So the first was the implementation of a water treatment plant with augmentations of supply pipelines from Bahana Creek. The second was to develop a Mulgrave River water source to increase the overall yield. And those first two are what is forming Cairns Water Security Stage 1 as a project, which again, we'll touch on shortly. The third short-term initiative was the development of a demand management strategy. So again, just kind of focus on why we actually need a new water supply. So the key prongs here are population growth, water quality, and legal compliance. So touching on those, population growth, the current population of Cairns is around 168,000, based off Council's 2021 State Environment Report. As you can see on the screen here, the population growth is expected to be around 236,000 by 2041, based on data from the Statistics Office. It is probably worth noting here that this is 2018 data. There is a new round of these estimations due out early next year. Touching on the water quality and system resilience. So currently the Cairns scheme is heavily reliant on Coplode Dam, and it's a single full treatment plant. The Bahana Creek treatment does require some improvement, and I'll touch on that shortly as well. And both of these key sources, the treatment plants are unfortunately vulnerable to disruptions during the wet season. Certainly a key aspect of the strategy moving forward. In terms of levels of service, so the levels of service in Cairns are measured according to frequency and severity of water restrictions. And Council's ongoing commitment is that the current level of service is maintained as the population grows. It's quite unreasonable to expect the Cairns community to be put on severe level restrictions on a permanent basis. And you've already heard that earlier with Southeast Queensland over the millennial drought was in an emergency situation, with some areas of Southeast Queensland reaching a level 6 water restriction, and desalination plants being quite urgently built at the Gold Coast as a result. So touching on Cairns water usage. So Cairns residential water use is similar to that of other Queensland regional centres, and is actually quite significantly better than that of comparable tropical cities such as Townsville and Darwin. In this table, Southeast Queensland, just at footnote number 1, represents the average of across multiple service providers, so Unity Water, Urban Utilities, Redland City Council, Logan City Council, and the Gold Coast. You can obviously see that there's a bit of a gap even between Cairns and Southeast Queensland. That's largely due to the much lower, it's largely due to the much the different urban and lifestyle factors amongst, of course, others, such as density of living compared to the more regional centres. Noting that you'll see up the top there that this graph is representing kilolitres per property, but it is considered the best apples for apples comparison of publicly available data. It's as you can see, it's sourced by the Bureau of Meteorology. You also see Cairns, Mackay has made some significant improvements over recent years, and again, from a comparable area, is performing quite well, and I'll touch on that shortly as well. So just going back to that supply demand, as was mentioned earlier as well, so the current water sources for Cairns is the Copperlode Falls Dam, with around 38,000 megalitres. If anyone's a numbers person, that's about 15,000 Olympic swimming pools. Bahana Creek as well, and Council also has several smaller, low volume run-of-river water sources, especially in the southern suburbs. So for example, Frenchman Creek, Junction Creek, Fishery Creek, Little Mulgrave, Mid Creek, and there's a few others as well. Something to point out here, though, is that even with the ongoing demand management, we will still reach this critical crossover point due to the limited supply of the existing sources. So covering off the demand management pieces, just want to run through some achievements and the current priorities. So Council has had an active demand management strategy with associated suite of actions and initiatives since around 2006. The impact of Council's demand management approach is quite significant. So as you can see here on that right-hand side of the screen, it has delivered a 38% reduction in water usage per capita in Cairns from 2006 to 2020, 2021. And again, you can see in that shaded blue section, this is over the period while the Cairns population has continued to grow. Council is, of course, continuing to implement demand management initiatives to reduce the water consumption across the sectors. So it's not just residential or commercial, but we're also looking at industrial and tourism sectors as well. One of those initiatives that's currently ongoing is the leak detection program. So that first program was quite successful, as you can see, historically, and we've just kicked off a 3-year leak detection program as well. Some other initiatives include smart water meters, bulk water meter audits, replacements, recycled water use, Council's online water education program, and permanent water conservation measures. So just touching on a few of those. So smart water meters is quite a hot topic for Council. So next year we're looking at phase 2 of the whole of community rollout commencing, which includes customer portals and a few other bits and pieces. Certainly the case study, and going back to that Mackay data on that previous table, so the installation of smart water meters was found to be quite effective in Mackay. So almost all Mackay residents, at least 90%, now have smart water metering. The technology enabled quick notification of leaks and improved customer engagement to reduce water consumption. And with that smart water meter and associated customer engagement in Mackay, the average duration of a leak reduced from 150 days down to just 60 days. And the average per capita residential consumption was reduced by around 12%. Also included in the current demand management piece is a content around recycled water. So we're currently preparing a business case to identify beneficial and value for money opportunities to progress recycled water topics. And this is in addition to the existing use of recycled water for irrigation of council-owned assets and construction activities as well. So just touching on the Cairns Water Security Stage 1 project, this other short-term key initiative. So there's a bit of a map on the next slide, but I'll just talk through the key components. So it includes a run of the river water intake down at the Mulgrave River near Gordonvale. Of course, the associated raw water pipeline that then feeds it to the water treatment plant. At the water treatment plant site, there'll be some water reservoirs and some associated infrastructure for that process. A network of pipelines, both raw and treated water, some reconfiguration of that network. And some enhanced treatment of that existing Bahana Creek supply. And again, I'll touch on that shortly as well. So just talking through this map here, you can see on the screen. So towards the bottom, you can see that orange, square. That is that new intake area. Following that orange dotted line is that raw water pipeline up to the water treatment plant in the top left. And you can see a very conceptual visualization of what that might look like as well. The red dotted lines, the green dotted line and the blue dotted line is that network reconfiguration and trunk main works. At this stage, this is still very much a conceptual design. A lot of this may be subject to further design development. The Bahana Creek enhancement that may be included as part of the project. So prior to 2010, council managed extraction of water from Bahana Creek only when avoiding periods of very dirty water, which is quite typical during wet weather events. However, in the June of 2010, a pathogenic bacteria, Cryptosporidium, was detected in the water extracted from Bahana Creek, resulting in the intake being shut down until August 2011. So you can kind of see that step change around 2010. Onwards from 2011, there's been much tighter management protocols that have been implemented to determine when that water is taken from that source. And of course, there's been a lot of management around ensuring the disinfection process achieves the required level of treatment. The outcome of these management protocols is unfortunately lower volumes have had to be taken since that 2010 event. And again, you can kind of see that step change on that graph. So certainly an opportunity around resilience is for the Cairns Water Security Stage 1 project is to include some treatment quality improvements and resilience for the Bahana Creek intake to return it simply to what it was previously before these events occurred. However, we're not currently seeking to increase the Bahana. We're not currently seeking to amend the Bahana intake license. So we're simply trying to restore it to what it was with much greater improved quality of treatment. So just touching on the project timeline. So the project, I guess, more formally kicked off earlier this year. The project team's been assembled and a lot of the work this year is formed around the early design piece and aligning the procurement activities. Most of next year then will be what we call early contractor involvement, which is quite a collaborative piece with contractors to ensure that we get the best bang for buck. It reduces a lot of that risk early on in the project process and really maximizes value for money opportunities. We're then looking to receive and assess those tenders towards the end of next year with the completion of that design in 2024 and looking at around a 2-year construction window, again, obviously lining up to those security matters. It's certainly worth mentioning, in addition to WASAG, the Cairns Water Security in addition to the WASAG and the Cairns Water Security Strategy process, the project has also undergone an independent detailed business case in 3 stages. So this is as per the business case development framework, which is managed by the Department of State Development, Infrastructure, Local Government and Planning. You can see those 3 stages there on the screen. So stage 1 is the strategic assessment. Stage 2 is the options analysis. And stage 3 is the detailed business case. If you're quite interested in those reports, both of those reports for stages 1 and 2 are available on our website. If there is particular interest in some of those initiatives, I'd certainly direct you towards stage number 2 report, as it details a lot of the options which were considered, again, independently to WASAG. There were 48 initiatives that were long listed, which resulted in 2 being shortlisted, and of course the final solution, which you've just seen on the previous slides. Sorry, we'll go back one. I should mention stage 3 is currently being finalised. So when that is final, we'll certainly be announcing that more formally. But of particular note is, as part of that stage 3 process, is a detailed sustainability and environmental assessments. Of course, as well as the standard business case topics such as economics, management approvals, and many other riveting topics. Probably just before I close out, just want to touch on a few FAQs. Might already be thinking some of these topics in the back of your brain. So the source of the water, so we'll certainly be drawing the water from the Mulgrave River itself. We're not taking the water from the aquifer. With that river's take, council will only draw water when we're allowed to under our licence conditions. There is quite a strict threshold flow limit at which we can no longer take water from the Mulgrave River. And a common one, understandably, is around rainwater tanks. So it's certainly a popular option to replace mains water in some areas. But unfortunately, it's not a solution for providing a safe, reliable supply of bulk drinkable water. Certainly around the tropical environment of Cairns, we receive quite a lot of that rainfall in the first 3 months of the year, and then it's quite dry for the rest of the year. So certainly the advantage of the bulk water supply is to even out some of those issues. If there are any particular questions about the project, feel free, if you think of them later on tonight, feel free to shoot them through to that email address you can see on the screen. We're trying to upload as much information as we can onto our website. You can see there as well. As new updates become available, we'll certainly be posting frequent updates on our website as well. So thank you very much for your time, and that's it from me.
Thank you, Councillor Moller and David Stevens. I'm just going to change the slides here. While we do that, I'd like to get Bruce to come up and share with us a little bit about the Mulgrave catchment.
I'm going to talk from over here, if that's all right. Can you hear me from here okay? Good. I'm on a very tight leash with this timing tonight, so I'm going to just launch right into it. So hang on, guys. First up, you probably might be surprised that we're not vehemently opposed in the Mulgrave Catchment Group's not vehemently opposed to Mulgrave River Stage 1. There's a reason, a history to that, right, which we'll come to. What we are particularly interested at this stage is how well the project gets assessed by the department. I call them DNR still. I don't know what they're called this year. Could be anything. So interested in how well it's assessed by DNR. We're particularly interested in the e-flow or the water sharing rules that are attached to it. And we have a particular bent on what follows stage 1. And we'll get to that. This is the area of consideration for this water supply story. Down here we've got the Mulgrave catchment with the Bihanna sub-catchment, which is one of Cairns' main water supply. We have Trinity Inlet. Is this been working? Trinity Inlet with Cairns City and all those pesky humans in it. Over here we've got the Barron catchment with the freshwater sub-catchment with Copperlow Dam and Freshwater Creek. And then the larger Barron catchment out here, and this area out to Mareeba Dimbula is of significance, and some of you may not have realised that, and hopefully you will tonight. This is our backyard, Gordon Vale area, Mulgrave catchment. This is definitely Yidinji country here, particularly Dulabed, Malanbarra and Wanjuru. We acknowledge those guys when we talk about this area. The Mulgrave catchment already has a fairly significant off-take load. So I've got two small supplies here, Fishery Creek and Little Mulgrave. Whites Falls is the supply for Cairns from the Hannah Gorge. The Mulgrave mill has a licence or an allocation of 20,000 megalitres a year, which is very significant. It's not used all the time, and they're getting very good at recycling water. You can see it's a significant item. We're working up to Mulgrave stage 1. I've got 7,500 meg there, but the council's actually applying for 6,000 megalitres. And then sometime in the future, it may also have a Mulgrave stage 2. It's a possibility. We hope it doesn't occur, but it may. So you can see that the lower Mulgrave does have this water offtake burden. Some water supply, some other. At one stage, we're also possibly going to have water taken from groundwater through the Mulgrave Aquifer to Loomba. That was a particularly bad idea, but that started us off on a period of engagement with the Cairns Council, and that ended up culminating in the Water Security Advisory Group that you've already heard a fair bit about tonight. That group was a big animal with a very big job, a very intense exercise. Cutting right to the chase, besides talking about demand management, his primary job was to get a consensus on a list of preferred options and a consensus on the sequence that those options would be implemented with. That's very important points. I do have to say, back then, seems like ancient history now, but regarding environmental concerns, it was pretty well Mulgrave, Landcare, CAFNEC and the Indigenous guys versus the rest. It's just the way it is. A lot of vested interest, as it should be, urban demand, business, tourism, all the rest of it. The environment was probably not high on their agenda, but it definitely was on ours. And I give enormous credit to Angelica Zerl, who was representing CAFNEC then, and she was just fantastic in that job. I've got to plough through this, guys, so I'm not going to talk about all these. These were the list of all the new supply options considered. The ones that ended up being the priority considerations were those in blue. And they're all fairly self-explanatory, except for this one here, the conversion of MIS losses or entitlement to Cairns. Let me explain. Here in the Barron catchment, we've got water comes out of Tinaroo, goes into the irrigation channels for the Mariba Dimbula irrigation scheme. Somebody worked out that something like up to 44,000 megalitres a year is lost in that system. That'd be evaporation, leakage, wastage, whatever. They also estimated that between 10 to 14,000 megalitres of that water could be retrieved if some money was spent. And if that's the case, that water could be released down the Barron River to be harvested by the council at Lake Placid for urban water supply. Interesting point that many people aren't aware of. The final result of the WASAG after all those meetings, can you see that all right? Was this medium-term strategy. So the graph here is the same as these words here. If you can't read the words on the graph, they're here in print below it. The bottom line on the graph is, at the time, the expected population growth. And these steps are the proposed new supplies, but underpinned down here by demand management. It's just an automatic, there'll be some demand management. It's probably up to council how well that demand management is done. The next new supply was going to be Mulgrave River Stage 1, which is where we are now, followed by the Barron River, followed by Mulgrave River Stage 2. Importantly, a longer-term strategy also recommended the conversion of those irrigation losses we talked about a second ago, and then a regional dam. Now, at the time, it's Nalinga. That's probably fallen off the table now because the business case apparently didn't stack up. Where we are now with the Mulgrave River Stage 1 proposal, as outlined by Brett and David, a few minor mistakes on there. So the 7,500 megalitres is about 6,000. It's still about 20 megalitres a day. The council are still going through the final stages of approval from, I call them DNR, the department. And as part of that seeking final approval, they undertake a large modelling exercise to satisfy DNR's requirements. I've got there that the offtake was going to be from wells in the river, and that's what we thought at one stage. Apparently that's not the case anymore, Brett. It's going to come from infrastructure right beside the river, correct? So I stand corrected on that. The big thing for us always is the E-flow or the water sharing rules. And in the Wet Tropics Water Resource Operations Plan, they are specified as those figures. So 220 megalitres a day of river flow, they can take 100% of their flow. As the river level drops, they can take less and less until the river flow gets to 160 megalitres a day and they have to stop taking. Only this afternoon, I saw another set of figures for that environmental flow where the off-cut, instead of being 160, was down to 75. We're going to have to investigate that a lot more. The figures we got here that are in the rocks seem to be quite acceptable. A figure of a cut-off point of only 75 meg in the river is a different equation. So, Brett, that's something we might talk about later on. Just to put in that little conversation in context, down below here, you've got the low flows gauged at Pete's Bridge. A rough look at the enormous amount of data there from 1972. You can see that dry season flows very roughly from 1,000 down to 400 megalitres a day. Then there'll be a series of years where it gets down to 300, then 200, and very occasionally, as in 1992 and 2002, got as low as around 80 megalitres a day. So you can see the importance of those E-flow specifications coming from the department. In a changing climate, low flow is becoming not only more common, but of longer duration. So definite warning bells there. Our main concerns about the Mulgrave River offtake. You can give all sorts of motherhood statements about environmental values and social this and whatever else. All those boil down really to this: to maintain necessary dry season water dynamics for ecosystems and community. And the water dynamics is probably a better term than just flow, because it's a dynamic system. Climate change, obviously a concern if low flows are becoming more common for longer. We've already talked about the long-term adequacy of environmental flow rules. The key one term there being long-term. Here in 2022, we might decide they're okay. When the water plan gets reviewed in 10 years' time, it might be a different assessment, different ball game, and they need to be looked at again. The Mulgrave Mill is a big commercial entity in our area, and so its function has to be maintained. Its water allocation needs to be preserved. One of our big concerns is that if Mulgrave 1 goes ahead as expected, what will follow in a few years' time for the next water supply? And you saw previously how the WASAG had that stepped recommendation for supplies. And what we're thinking from that earlier picture we showed you before about how the Mulgrave already has significant offtake burden on the catchment, we're thinking that after stage 1, any further supply coming from Mulgrave is very much an unfair burden. Because of that, we're looking at proper investigation of the other options as next supply, not just assuming that Mulgrave stage 2 will follow stage 1. Again, as previously discussed, a big part of that is to investigate those irrigation losses in the Mariba irrigation scheme as a substitute, not only as a good idea to start with, but as a substitute for possible Mulgrave 2 or possible Barron River offtake in the future. Very big deal is for everyone to fully appreciate the value of diversified supply. If there's one lesson that COVID has taught everybody is definitely don't have all your eggs in one or two baskets. You need diversified supply of everything, whether it's building materials or water. And that also leads to that thing about don't just keep relying on the Mulgrave to be the main supplier. It needs to be spread much wider. And bottom line again is any new water supply or enhancement of supplies, whatever, should not be used as a substitute for really good demand management. Just finally, I'll give you some final thoughts, and these are from not just this Mulgrave stage 1 thing, but from our long journey over, or probably for me since 1992, working hard on water flow preservation in the Mulgrave. Mulgrave Landcare, practical and pragmatic bunch. We have to work with council because they've got a very big job supplying water in a difficult situation. We're pragmatic, but we have a limit, and that limit is basically ecological. If the river flows and all that get too low, too impinged upon, that's where the line's going to be drawn. I'm going to give credit to the DNR, whatever they're called now, for long-term quality engagement. And that's not only to their regional managers, but to the science team that's did a lot of fisheries and ecological work behind the scenes. That's particularly important for us because we've got 2 really good environmental flow specs on Behanna Creek, one in the gorge and one down the floodplain. Again, looking for that diversified water supply, environmental safeguards and good demand management. The attention to detail regarding e-flows is so important. We are expecting DNR to improve the water monitoring systems downstream of Gordonvale, because that was one of the big issues with, I hope I haven't missed a slide. No, I'm just going to take you back very quickly, that previous slide. See this item here, data availability for CRC modelling. So when the DNR is assessing council's modelling, they're looking at obviously the data that goes in that modelling. And a big issue to date has been the lack of good flow gauging and the lack of good coupled stream flow and groundwater gauging. And it's always been a point of ours that if you haven't got that quality, basic quality data, it's going to be very hard to do good modelling, and that makes assessment a bit tricky, which is why, again, we're so adamant that the assessment by DNR is very important. Yeah. So we also just hope that the council will remain committed to the WASAG recommendations, that step supply. It's a bit not negotiable, but lots of discussion to be had, but the principle of not just assuming Mulgrave 2 will follow on. I want to thank CAFNEC for their quality support over a long period of time, particularly through Angelica at the time, but to you guys now. And I also want to thank those folk with enough environmental ethic to actually do things in support of these type of themes instead of sitting home in your lounge chairs. So thanks very much.
Thank you, Bruce. Thank you. I'd now like to pass the mic to Bronwyn, our community campaigner, who's going to speak as to CAFNEC's concerns and recommendations. I've been booted off the Wi-Fi. Yeah. It's always hard with all these technical issues. I know that my colleagues have been working all day trying to figure this out, so bear with us.
The password might expire, but hopefully we're good. Okay.
Here's Bronwyn.
Okay, so my name is Bronwyn. I already spoke to you guys today, but I can do my proper intro now. So I did study here at JCU, and I am now studying at Griffith. And I also work at the Cairns and Far North Environment Centre as the community campaigner. I am definitely no hydrology expert or water policy expert. I had no knowledge of how water was managed in Cairns until I took on this work. So today I hope to share what I've learned in the last 8 months or so, as well as the results of an analysis that we've commissioned to better understand what the opportunities are for water management in our region. Thank you. So before I get to the results of this analysis, I want to outline what our concerns are with the stage 1 project proposal. We do understand that council has made efforts to design a project that will have the least cost to the environment, but we believe it is important to discuss the potential impacts of the project as we currently understand it. As we've heard, there's a detailed business analysis to come, so we're hoping that some of our concerns will be addressed in that. So they can be summarized as follows. In terms of the environment, the proposal to harvest water from the Mulgrave during times of peak flow may impact flow-dependent species, as Bruce was discussing. We also know that climate change is projected to impact freshwater availability in our region due to coastal inundation, extreme weather events, and increased rates of evaporation. There's also evidence that Cairns may be more vulnerable to changes in rainfall patterns compared to other regions across the state. So for this reason, infrastructure solutions that rely on the current level of water availability in our system are not what we would consider climate resilient. And we have heard that infrastructure can be disrupted during wet season. The proposed project is situated on the lands of the Dulabed and Malanbarra Yidinji peoples who have cultural connections to the Mulgrave River and surrounding waterways. We understand that council has begun the process of engaging with traditional owners, but we haven't seen the evidence yet of efforts to avoid impacts to cultural heritage. And we also believe that these traditional owners should have been engaged a bit sooner in the design process. And finally, we also acknowledge that the project may come at a cost to other users, such as recreationalists, rafters on the Mulgrave. Some of our members have asked us whether there was any way to go about solving our water crisis without taking water from the environment, such as through demand management or limiting growth of our population. So we did turn to the experts to better understand whether there are opportunities remaining for our region to reduce our demand and potentially defer the need for infrastructure. Next slide, please. So we commissioned a consulting firm called Natural Capital Economics to undertake this analysis, which they completed about a week and a half ago, and we're just launching it for the first time this evening. The analysis team was led by Jim Binney, who's a resource and environmental economic practitioner with over 25 years of experience and more than 220 consulting assignments under his belt. The analysis collated and compared consumption data and water infrastructure data against a common metric to benchmark options and identify potential opportunities where council may be better off focusing on demand management as opposed to increasing supply. So we hope that this report will add to council's existing body of work aimed at improving long-term planning and decision-making for water security in Cairns. So the analysis revealed that both Cairns and Townsville recorded significantly higher rates of residential water usage compared to Mackay, Southeast Queensland, and the Queensland-wide average. Cairns residents use 57% more water than Mackay and 70% more than residents of Southeast Queensland. The analysis also looked at how our demand changes depending on whether tourist populations are included in the measurements, and found that either way, water consumption in our region is significantly higher than the benchmark regions of Mackay and SEQ. The analysis also looked at likely causes for our high water use and found that even when considering these influencing factors, such as rainfall data, water service charges, dwelling types, and building approvals, the per capita water use in Cairns is still higher than would normally be expected. This indicates that there may still be significant untapped opportunities for demand management. The graph on the screen now depicts the proportion of water usage by sector, including residential, non-residential, which is your commercial, industrial, and agricultural, and non-revenue. So non-revenue water includes any unbilled or unmetered supply water, as well as losses through leakage, overflow, or unauthorized use. So as you can see, council has done great work to reduce the proportion of non-revenue water use, with it only accounting for 3% of total water demand between 2017 and 2019. This points to the work that council has done to maintain our pipes and delivery systems and identify leaks. This also means that there is unlikely to be any return on investment by attempting to further reduce non-revenue water through leak detection, for example, beyond the regular maintenance. And therefore, any savings must be considered from the demand side by reducing usage rates. Next one. So this slide shows the water service charges in Cairns, Mackay, and Townsville. The charges are set by council each financial year and generally consist of a fixed connection fee as well as a volumetric charge based on the amount of water used. The volumetric charge is most likely to influence demand as it incentivizes a reduction of consumption in order to bring down costs. Mackay and Townsville have both implemented incremental or inclining block charging schedules to provide greater incentives for reduced water usage. Cairns currently has the lowest water charges for both fixed connection as well as the variable volumetric charge, and currently offers no incentives within our pricing structure to benefit residents that are managing their use or penalize residents who are using excessively. In Council's demand management strategy, they estimate that more than 50% of metered water consumption is billed to only 10% of billing accounts. This points to significant untapped incentives to penalize excessive use. So this graph plots residential water usage rates, which is the solid line for each region, against annual rainfall, which is the dotted lines. This helps demonstrate the relationship between those variables. So as you can see, Mackay, which is the darkest color, has fairly consistent annual rainfall, which is mirrored by its residential usage. It maintains itself throughout the year. Townsville sees increases in water usage during times of rainfall reduction, which makes sense. Whereas Cairns rainfall is widely variable from year to year, yet our usage is very consistent, especially compared to Townsville. This infers that changes in annual rainfall do not appear to materially influence our demand for provider-supplied water. So I'll get into our recommendations now. So as we've seen, the regional comparison of the relatively low current pricing schedules for water charges in Cairns suggests that inefficiencies can be gained from introducing newer policies for pricing. A tiered water consumption rate or multiple pricing plans would provide that extra incentive to residents to reduce their consumption beyond a current point. As I said, currently residents that are consciously reducing their household water usage are not receiving any of those cost savings. We were really excited to hear from Council about the smart water meter rollout, and I think it was 50,000 by mid-2025, which is just awesome. So these smart water meters, as we've heard, they provide real-time information on our water consumption to providers and residents so that they can help our community be informed about our peak usage times and ways to bring down costs on our bills. However, we would like to see the rollout of these meters accompanied with community education to help Cairns residents understand why reducing their usage and managing their demand is important, and also how they can do so. I know that there are resources on Council's website for this, but in our experience, engaging with the community through workshops and informative events is far more effective than online resources. The graph that we saw earlier depicting how levels of rainfall do not seem to correspond with usage rates infers that we continuously use water from our supply system throughout the year, no matter how much rain is pooling in our yards. We understand that as our local climate goes through periods of dry and wet, rainwater tanks are less likely to be useful during the dry season when rainfall is limited. However, it is CAFNEC's opinion that rainwater tanks still do provide an opportunity for residents to supplement their metered water usage when we do get rain, especially for outdoor use like garden maintenance, filling up the pool, watering your indoor plants, and so forth. Helping residents to invest in rainwater tanks for their properties would surely ease the pressure on our system and provide residents with a private water supply during times of emergency or disaster when mains can be cut off. Next one, please. So to conclude, our analysis demonstrates that if Cairns was closer to if demand in Cairns was closer to what it is in the benchmark region of Mackay, a 20-year assessment shows that our demand for water in 2041 would be significantly lower than it is currently, even considering the projected population growth from the Queensland government population projections. If we could reach this level of efficiency through effectively implemented policies like the ones we've just outlined, we could save the region a total of 163 megalitres across the 20-year period. It is CAFNEC's opinion, therefore, that demand-side management still provides many significant untapped opportunities for us to relieve the water crisis that we're facing and potentially defer the need for costly infrastructure and further supply-side management into the future. So that concludes my presentation. Thank you. I will also be available to answer questions to the best of my abilities. And the comparison analysis will be available to the public via our website in the coming days. And if you would like to stay informed on our water advocacy work, we've got a QR code on the front of the pamphlet there where you can register your email address. Thank you.
Thank you, Bronwyn. So now we have a couple of key stakeholders in the room today, and I'm going to introduce them and then I'm going to let them speak. So we have Steve McDermott here, manager at Dulabed and Malanbarra Yidinji Aboriginal Corporation, who will be speaking on behalf of the traditional owners of the lands on which the new water infrastructure is being proposed by Cairns Regional Council. We also have Dennis Ah-Kee, Wanjuru elder of the Russell River Catchment and owner of Jaragun Ecoservices. Unfortunately, Clive Murray, traditional owner and co-director of Wanjuru and Majai Aboriginal Corporation, was unable to join us this evening. So I'm going to give Steve and Dennis a couple of minutes to share with us some potential concerns they have and ask the panel any direct questions they have. We will have the mic, or you can come up.
Sure, thanks, Aisha. First of all, I'd like to give apologies from directors and elders from Dulabed, Malanbarra, Yidinji Aboriginal Corporation who are unable to be here tonight, but I have the authority from them to speak on their behalf. So I suppose in regard to the proposal, we have been meeting with Council this year on a number of occasions, and I think Council are well aware of our concerns. I think for the major one is the impact of the proposal, that's going ahead, the project on the cultural values of the river. So it's on the tangible and intangible values of the river. So it's just not the eels and the fish and the sites, middens, burials, all those features. It's also the intangible. So it's all the story places, the dreaming track storylines, all those spiritual places, and that connection to country. So it's what is the impact of the project, just not the physical impact of that site, but the impact of the reduction in water within the river upon those values. Currently, DMIAC, the corporation, and I can't speak on behalf of Wanjuru Majai and Gimoy other than as a group, because we have met together with Council. There's a general consensus among the three that it doesn't necessarily support the project at the moment. We want additional information, development of cultural heritage management plans for the site, with the infrastructure for the take of the water being within Dulabed, Malanbarra, Yidinji country. We have sort of allowed Council to undertake its current work there for drilling bores to gain some additional data, and we've had cultural heritage monitors on site for that part of the project as well. So we thank Council for that. But yeah, currently I know both. I can only talk for DMIAC, but I know the other two were of the same opinion that currently we want to see more information, see what are the impacts likely to be on the cultural values. Development of that cultural heritage management plan was sort of key. Elders have really noticed changes in the river over time, so that's an historic thing from past uses, so from early days, so from mining, timber getting, agricultural uses. They've seen the system sort of be degraded. They don't want to see that system be degraded any further. Elders mentioned about areas where islands, the water's getting lower, there's islands appearing in different places. So they recognise that the system's changed, and what are going to be future impacts. So we're living in a changing, well, everything's always changing, but we've got climate change. Things are changing at a faster rate. And what does that mean for the future? And I suppose it's just some of those dreaming stories aren't just, it's just not the impacts of the dreaming stories on Dulabed, Malanbarra, Yidinji for those places. Those storylines continue across country, and it affects other groups as well. So it's, yeah, the impacts on the cultural values is a key feature with concerns for Dulabed, Malanbarra and Yidinji people.
Do you have any questions that you'd like to ask?
No, not at the moment. Yeah, there's a couple of things which might take up at a later point, particularly with sort of some of the things that Bruce pointed about what the resource operation plan says in regard to that take from Pete's Bridge. I know Future that notice which we received today or last couple of days has a different figure which doesn't seem to line up with the ROP, which you find that's sort of fairly interesting. But yeah, no, I don't think so at the moment. Yeah, sure. Oh, and I'd just like to thank CAFNEC for the opportunity to come along and talk as well. Can't forget that one.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Dennis, would you like to share your concerns and pose any questions to the panel?
I'm the director of Jaragun Ecoservices. We've been managing the Russell River catchment since 2013. Over that time, we developed the catchment management plan, which has been accepted by the Queensland government as a good framework to apply to other catchments within the wet tropics. One of the key things that concerns me is that we're currently doing something with Geoscience Australia. We're all in conjunction with JCU, and we're looking at the effects of climate change and water level rises on the geomorphology of the catchment itself. So we can actually plan ahead and we can look at the strategies that we need to prepare for these things that are coming on. The second thing is that I see a couple of risks in this thing, and we deal with risks all the time on a holistic level within the catchment. One is sediment buildup within the Russell River itself and also with Babinda Creek. If you don't have those big flushes, and they're becoming less and less frequent, and hopefully with climate change and the weather patterns, it'll increase a bit more. We have sediment buildup. The problem with sediment buildup is it raises the bed of the river up. When we get big floods, naturally, more floods are going to happen across particularly our area where we've got agricultural, farming, etc. And that's a big problem, I see. The other one I'm concerned about is that First Nations cultural flows, and I don't know who's involved in this, but I've never seen anything there about cultural flows. That's a big strategy of the Commonwealth that's coming in. So that's another thing. So getting our geomorphic study done with Geoscience Australia and JCU, combining with the cultural flows, combining with our catchment management program, we can better see what the effects are going to be, particularly for our future generations and the future generations of farmers and people within the Russell River catchment. Thanks. That's 2 minutes.
Do you have any questions?
Eh?
Do you have any questions for the panel at the moment?
Well, I think I said them.
Wonderful.
It's mainly the risks that I'm really concerned about. Is particularly, you know, I don't know how you consult with the Aboriginal groups, but I don't hear anything about cultural flows and the necessity to take those cultural flows into account. There's volumes of papers on cultural flows, and yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you, Steve and Dennis. We're now going to open the floor to you, our community, to direct any questions to the panel of speakers in front of us. Now, I'm going to be an active speaker. We started a little bit late. Unfortunately, we might go a few minutes late, but I am going to limit your time speaking, and I really stress that you ask questions and not make comments as such. So I will, if you are, you know, going on a little bit too long, I will ask you to be a bit more succinct. We have Pat here, so if you raise your hand, Pat will bring over the mic, and then you can ask your question to one of the panelists. And the panelists, do they have a mic? Yeah, we'll have a mic to answer as well. So does anybody have any questions? Yes.
Good evening. My name's Dee. I live in the Northern Beaches area. I have a question regarding your comment about that personal or household management, demand management is not going to be very much of a forefront for your campaign, and also the fact that you'd said that you already do a demand management. And I'm very particular. I actually watch the Cairns Council actually provides a graph for personal household usage. I look at mine every quarter, and my household usage is 50%. I'm the lowest one. My entire suburb is 50% lower than everybody else. And I actually do demand management at my household, and it's exceptionally effective. I can collect enough water to keep my household for water and cooking water for 4 months. And I don't have a tank. I get the buckets out and I put them out, and that comes straight out of the sky. I know that's not everybody's thing, but my issue is also around rainwater tanks, and I don't see why rainwater tanks are an issue. If it's regarding bacteria and all those sort of and quality of water, then Cairns City Council can actually mandate that every household that's built has a water purifier, filtrating system underneath their sink. And that will be at the cost of the individual house and not a cost to Cairns City Council. So I'd like to understand why you don't think that it's valuable.
Thank you, Dee. Who would you like to ask that to Councillor Moller?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for the question. I might just, in terms of the technical details around water tank and drinking water, I just want to first of all touch on your comment about smart water meters. And I do thank CAFNEC for your report up there and what you've commissioned. There's some information in there that we will take on board, particularly around incentivisation. But what we hope to do with smart water meters, we rolled it out a few years ago in Palm Cove, and we saw the savings there of 400 million litres. That's from the Palm Cove study. We wanted to roll it out further, but COVID hit. So in terms of our budget considerations, we had to put it on hold for two budget years. But we've now, as a council, invested in the rollout of further smart water meters. Now that will help detect leaks, but more importantly, people like you who are conscious of demand management within your household, that's really important. And to CAFNEC's point, this rollout needs to be supported by an education program so that residents do understand what benefits can come from smart water meters. We've seen the positive benefits by Mackay having been able to roll out, we want to obviously progress our rollout, and we expect through that demand management that we'll have a further reduction per capita. So hand in hand with future supply, demand management will always be front and centre and part of our water strategy. That's really important. And just to touch on, we know Brisbane and Mackay will have tourists, but when we talk about the ABS statistics, and Dave put the graph up there about our 38% reduction since 2006 in usage in our demand strategy, we have anywhere between 30 and 40,000 tourists in our city pre-COVID, when we've got the internationals, with domestic strong again now, but the internationals. So that graph, when you factor in those tourists that aren't that they're not captured in that ABS statistic. So the demand management strategy has been working. It can be improved on, and we've got some good ideas that have come forward tonight. And thank you. And it's people like you, in terms of your own consciousness around water usage and demand and what that means. We hope more and more of our residents will take that up as we roll our smart water meters out. Do you want to say anything about the rain tanks?
Thank you, Brett.
Happy to touch on rainwater tanks.
Absolutely.
So certainly throughout the WASAG water security strategy and through that detailed business case, rainwater tanks were part of conscious mind when developing those options. From council's perspective, it went through a multi-criteria analysis, and cost, of course, is one of those criteria. What was outlined is that from a council perspective, the better use of ratepayers' funds is for a bulk water supply. And to take your piece around the operation and maintenance of those rainwater tanks and various sanitation pieces, certainly it would be quite a significant capital upfront cost to install or perform some sort of funding incentivization for rainwater tanks. And it simply didn't stack up compared to some of those more bulk water supply options. Does that answer the piece?
Great, thank you. Does anybody else have any questions? Yep.
Good evening. My name's Chelsea. I'd also like to extend my acknowledgement of country, elders past and present. My inquiry or question is there any mandatory, in inverted commas, management strategies that are set for households other than an optional meter incentive or participatory project? And then also, is council or would council be interested in taking part in a project whereby the rainwater tanks and or diverted water for catchment into a tank is created through donated materials?
Would like to answer.
And then lastly, what in other mandatory projects have been looked at for council operations, for example? Because as far as I can see in my current years in work with council, I don't see much in the movement of water catchment as a development into the operations of our works.
All right, thank you, Chelsea. Brett.
Thanks, Chelsea. In terms of our operations, obviously we're doing a lot of work in recycling water and using that in recreational parks, etc. In terms of mandating, I'm not sure what projects around the water tanks, but look, we're always happy to have a discussion, listen to your issues and what you want to look at, and then discuss it from there. We have to do that assessment, but we don't close ourselves off in terms of the discussions around projects or how we might be able to do things better. So certainly, if we can catch up later, I'll get your details, and I'm happy to facilitate a discussion with some of our water officers around what you're thinking.
Thank you. We have another question.
Yeah, my name is Tim. I've got a question.
We can hear you, Tim. That's fine.
Yeah, hello, my name is Tim. I've got a few questions. Why is the Mulgrave meal that draws 20,000 litres, according to Bruce's figures, off the mark? The figures were saying between 6,000 and 7,000 litres being brought off the Mulgrave River, but Mulgrave meal is already pulling off 20,000 litres. Why are they not being encouraged / forced to reduce their quota of water that they actually use? That's it.
Thank you, Tim.
Look, the Mulgrave Mill and indeed our allocation is conditioned through the licence through DES. I think that's what it is now, Bruce, DES. You know, and Bruce will know. He's a cane farmer. I'm from a cane farming background as well. The Mulgrave Mill has made strides in terms of their recycling of water to reduce their intake. But that what they take is what they need to function as a mill and part of their operations. And they're very conscious as well in terms of particularly around the end of the season when we're heading November. If that river flow is low, again, that impacts on their operations. So they're very conscious of their licence and the allocation in terms of dealing with that water supply out of the Mulgrave.
Thank you. Yeah, of course. And if anybody else wants to speak.
Yeah, Tim, that is that working?
Yep.
Yeah. That 20,000 meg, that's the allocation. I did mention briefly that they don't use it. They don't use all of it all of the time. And a while back, they went to a lot of trouble to instigate a recycling system. And for a very short period, they're actually able to recycle 100% for, I don't know how long it was for, but do you remember? But anyway, that allocation is there, but it's not used all the time. But your point is still valid that 20,000 meg compared to 6,000 meg is a significant difference, but it is a big factory and it is commercially important. I'd probably follow up and find out exactly how much they do use normally in their normal operations.
Thank you. Another question at the back here. Yes, please go.
So just wanted to ask, what are the allocated funds towards this project? Do you have a predicted cost for the project? And will we see a breakdown of costs for proposed stages?
Thank you.
Yep. So certainly the current business case report that's again available on our website, the Stage 2 report, there's a full detailed costing in that report, as well as comparative costing for those other solutions as well. So certainly I'd again point you to that report and encourage you to feel free to have a read. Again, there's even further detailed costing estimates and operational costs and the like, again, coming out in that Stage 3 report, which is just currently being finalised at the moment.
Thank you. Does anybody else have any questions for the panel? Yes, just down here, Pat.
I can talk.
You can talk. Cheers.
Question for something for council. An incentive to give to ratepayers. Could you consider a campaign of giving away water-saving shower heads or tap timers, and another small way that people could cut down their water use? Is that something you have considered, or would you consider doing something like that?
Thank you.
I don't think I need a microphone.
No.
No,
Thank you.
certainly heard that loud and clear. Look, that's certainly something we're prepared to have a look at. I was interested in the CAFNEC report there about incentivisation around demand management in households through that cost of water. I found that interesting and certainly happy to take that back to council for us to have a look at and workshop. In terms of bits and pieces, shower heads or whatever, again, it comes back to our budget and, you know, where's the best spend for the buck in terms of everything we've got to do. But yeah, you know, this is a pretty significant cost in terms of the project. I've reiterated that demand management remains important, and we'll take away some of the suggestions here today. I'd imagine that those presentations will be available and we can we can have a look at that and then come back to CAFNEC and who's ever presented for more discussion. Absolutely.
Thank you.
The council development applications or any non-residential unit fixed conditions very much.
I don't know if the live stream.
That's all really done. It's been on quite some time.
5 to 8 years, it is one of the conditions.
So existing properties from that 5 to 8 years onwards, there hasn't been water saving device incentives?
Well, it's a bit, as Brett talked about, but budget-wise, it's very hard to tell someone they've got to go and spend money, but it's something that we'd certainly look at. How do we incentivise it? But it all costs money, of course.
All right, we'll keep going. Did Nigel want to say something, or are we just noting he's up there? Wonderful. Thank you, Nigel, for remaining on. We've got a few, we've got a question down the front here.
So if I could, I wouldn't mind adding a bit to that topic.
Yes, please, Nigel.
Yeah, so here in South East Queensland, in order to achieve the water savings that we did, the government did in fact actually subsidise changeover from water inefficient shower roses to water efficient shower roses, and also brought in the requirement that any new residential building had to be fitted with water efficient appliances and fixtures. So just by doing that, and when you look at the cost comparison between building new water supply infrastructure and subsidizing residents to install water efficient shower roses, you get an immense water saving, cost saving to achieve a fairly significant water saving. So it's really quite alarming that Cairns Regional Council hasn't done the figures on how much would it actually cost to subsidise transition or changing over from water inefficient shower roses to water efficient shower roses, particularly in the hotels in Cairns. Whenever I go to Cairns, I'm absolutely horrified every time I stay in a hotel that the amount of water that's coming out of those shower roses. So just by doing that alone, you would save an immense amount of water for a fraction of the cost of building new water supply infrastructure. It's not rocket science.
Thank you, Nigel. I'll speak to you, Steve.
My question sort of follows on what Nigel said. I was wondering, I might missed it. I was wondering if CAF has done those projections for that demand side management fully to see what sort of savings. It's got, I think, it's 35%. Yeah. Well, it's been made, but I'm just wondering, has it been projection? Because there is, I suppose, a continuation of that program to see what that saving could be down the track. And there's this comments which keep coming up about the cost of it. It's sort of like there's the dollar commitments from the state and the feds around investing in the infrastructure to take water from the Mulgrave River. I'm sure in discussions with states, some of that money or the other projections, other dollars available to invest in future demand side management, if those studies were there to show that, yes, we can make those through doing whatever the practice is, whatever mechanical devices are employed to do that demand side management. It's unclear if because I sort of see from what Council's saying, from CAFNEC saying in the report, there seems to be some discrepancy. So somewhere in there, the truth lies somewhere in there. Yeah.
Thank you, Steve.
Yeah, so certainly, again, unfortunately, I'm not close to some of these demand management programs, so hopefully I'll still be able to answer the topics here. So certainly I can talk to the business case, and a lot of this demand management and the continuation of demand management is fundamental to the existing business case. So that has already been built into those economic models. These topics around rainwater tanks and shower heads and the like are great topics. So we certainly definitely encourage the use of those. Here we're simply talking about the best use of ratepayer money is towards that bulk water supply. Of course, we are still working on that demand management strategy moving forward, in addition to this new supply as well. There will be, of course, some diminishing returns available by demand management. And so a lot of that is targeting the best bang for buck, again, on demand management side. And so that's where councils looked at the smart water meters, certainly in the immediate solution. From memory, the demand management strategy is currently going to be renewed shortly as well.
Ask my question in regards to that business case. Has the impacts on the cultural values and environmental values been factored into those costings? Is there economic value being factored into those costings?
Yep. Yeah, so certainly there is an economic analysis around a lot of those topics. As I said, in that stage 3 report, especially, there's sustainability environmental reports as well around environmental management as well. Certainly cultural aspects are included in that analysis.
Be really interested to see that because we've never seen that sort of stuff. So I'd be really interested to sort of see what they are and what those true costs are. I don't like putting costs on the environment and cultural values, but when the conversation is around economic things, you need to have it factored in somehow.
Yeah, absolutely, 100% agree.
Yep. And some of that's just the truth. How do you put an economic cost on someone's story or what?
Great, we'll keep moving. Got D there. Thank you, Steve.
Given that the cost of this huge infrastructure is actually going to fall back onto ratepayers, when we're already struggling with all cost of living at the moment, wouldn't it be more prudent to find out that how effective demand management at a household level and how effective and cost saving can be before it starts spending millions and millions of dollars? I would have thought it'd be best to know what you can do with the least amount of money first to see if it works before you go spending heaps and heaps and millions of dollars that we're ending up and have to pay for in very financial burden in the community already in existence.
Thank you.
Yeah, great question. So certainly a lot of that demand management piece, as you saw in that graph, it's commenced quite some time ago, and of course there has been some improvements over those 15 years. Certainly, there's only so long that we can delay a project of sourcing a new supply of water. The Cairns Water Security Stage 1 project has been delayed previously due to other factors as well, but certainly we are reaching that point where we can no longer delay it any further. But again, certainly that doesn't undermine the ongoing demand management practices that is still required with this project as well.
Can I say that we've been on this journey?
Just the microphone there.
I say we've been on this journey for another water supply for Cairns personally. When I joined council in 1994, that's 28 years ago. That's when we started, and that was with the Flaggy Creek. And we've been down a lot of, excuse the pun, dry gullies to get to where we are today. And as he said, there's only so long you can put it off for. And by the time stage 1 is built, we're into the 30 years since we started.
Very environmentally friendly and extremely waterwise. And I've hardly heard anything about means of reducing household water usage, apart from the fact that we've got water restrictions on how we water our garden. That's not a very effective demand management system for households. That's pathetic.
Yeah, but there's not a lot of people like you, and as Brett said, we need to educate people to be like you.
We'll keep moving. Wonderful. Do we want a response? Any other answers from the panel? No? We've got a question just at the back, and then we'll go to you, Bron. Thank you.
Just following on from what Nigel said about hotels.
Thank you, Dennis. Just over here, a question.
Just following on from what Nigel said, and also being mindful of some of the statistics that were presented earlier about different environments and different cities, and different demand. I wonder whether you've ever looked at trying to tease out what our hotels are actually using compared to in places where there may be demand management on those sorts of places. The reason I ask that is that we own a hotel unit and we own a house. The hotel unit has 2 showers in it and a washing machine that rarely gets used, but the water demand on that is much greater than on the home we live in with the big pool and all of the other bits and pieces. And I'm just wondering whether some sort of look at what those very large tourist hotels are using and some sort of demand management specifically on them might reveal for you. Have you ever looked at those sorts of things?
Thank you.
Unfortunately, that's outside of my personal experience and my personal involvement around demand management. But certainly, absolutely welcome the feedback. It'd be quite interesting to do that analysis. That's quite interesting information that you provided. Certainly around that demand management piece, they are looking across residential, commercial, industry, and tourism. So certainly welcome the feedback, but unfortunately, my touch point with the demand management team, that's a brilliant question. I'll certainly pass it on to them.
I think it's important to understand that we need an additional supply together with demand management. Copperlow Dam's only 38,000 megs. It's a very small dam, built 1976, a small population for Cairns back then. And that crossover point we saw at 2026 that's the risk factor where we've grown in population significantly. Your question's a good one, and I think we all remember travelling to Brisbane in the early 2000s when they were going through that significant drought down there, where the messaging was all about when you go to a hotel room, 3-minute showers, etc. So that was front and centre, and that's the importance of an education program to accompany demand management. We have advertised Thrive to Survive, etc. in terms of water demand. And what we see is when that sort of advertising happens, we see an improvement, then the advertising stops. Again, this is all a budget consideration in terms of costings and how we work that through. But again, some good messages coming through to us from the discussion tonight.
Thank you, Brett. Sure. Nigel, do you have a comment on the hotel question there?
Well, it seems to me that changing water use in Cairns' hotels is low-hanging fruit. Surely that's an easy thing to achieve. So it would seem to me that council really hasn't done its homework on how does it go about actually, firstly, encouraging community to change its water use behaviours, and then secondly, how to encourage industry to change its water use behaviours. So, compared to what happened here in southeast Queensland when we were literally, on the verge of running out of water, I would go as far as saying that Cairns Regional Council really hasn't, optimised the best possible outcomes outcomes from reducing demand in the Cairns Regional Council area. So that needs to be done first and foremost.
Thank you, Nigel. Did you want to?
No, just touching on the improvement in demand management by itself is not going to take away the risk of the water supply that we need. It's part and parcel. It goes hand in hand. We've recognised that. Nigel, thank you for your learnings, what SEQ's been through, and we're happy to engage and talk further on that. But again, it's a hand-in-hand approach, not one or the other, where we find ourselves today.
Thank you. We've got a question here from Bronwyn. Do we have any more questions from the floor, though? We do. Here, we'll bring the mic here, and then we'll do Bronwyn as the last question for this evening. Yeah, just Scott there. Thank you, Scott.
Brett, you talked a lot about the kind of the investments required. So some of that investment that will come for large infrastructure will come from state and federal government investment, rather than potentially ratepayers. But is there, that whole opportunity, and it's very difficult sometimes to get investment around demand management, repairs and maintenance, because everybody wants to fund infrastructure rather than optimization. But is there a pitch around, and council doing some fantastic work around smart green economy initiatives? Is there some, some gear shifts that we can potentially make around policy change, how we actually make those investments to stretch out the capital, by actually kind of using some of that potential money that might be available for capital to do things like, hotels, incentivization businesses, looking at the mill stuff. So looking a bit more strategically about where the points are of intervention, but you need money to be able to do that. And that's a challenge always, isn't it?
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Stuart. And a really good point. Our Cairns Regional Council has adopted the smart green economy strategy going forward. And obviously, water as a natural resource is a very big part of that. In terms of the government funding, certainly we can include looking at a demand management criteria in whatever funding stream may be available. Our immediate advocacy around this project was the support by state and federal government for 215 million towards the cost of this project, because we do need to source this additional stage 1 supply. Yeah, I think that's a good point. Happy to talk to Nick Massaso and our economic development officers in trying to have a holistic approach from the smart green economy and whatever else to support demand management options. So again, a good discussion for this to come out.
Thank you. We'll finish off with Bronwyn with the last question, and then we'll move on.
I do have a couple of questions, but I'll limit
Just
myself.
one, Bron.
I have a question about the state and federal funding that's been acquired for the project. Is it required to be paid back? And if so, how?
No, it's state and federal contribution to the project, but it doesn't have to be repaid.
Thank you.
Thank you. That's it for the community Q&A. I do understand that you may have more questions. David, I understand, is leaving his email with you, as well as Bronwyn, who will leave her email with you as well this evening. Before we finish off this tonight, we have a community poll to fill out, which you'll find either on your pamphlet or here. This is just being put together by CAFNEC to help CAFNEC understand the outcomes of the event this evening and hear everyone's thoughts on what we talked about. You can access the poll either here or on the pamphlet through your QR code on your phone, but I understand that if you don't know how to do that, like myself, you can sign up at the registration desk and we will send you that form so you can complete it when you get home. But this QR code really helps us understand your thoughts about the evening. So if you can do that, I think only a couple of people on their phones. All right. Well, that's it for tonight, and we conclude. And I'd like to thank our panelists this evening for taking the time to be here and sharing their thoughts, their opinions, and their work. And I'd like to also acknowledge our Steve and Dennis, who joined us this evening as our stakeholders, to share us your knowledge and your concerns. I'd also like to thank Bronwyn and Vanessa for putting this on this evening, and thank them for the continuing work they'll do as part of this water campaign that CAFNEC's running. And lastly, I'd like to thank you all for being here in attendance. We are facing a water security crisis here in our region, and we are grateful for your interest in this issue, and we hope that you are able to stay informed and prepared as we move on. So thank you, everyone.
Can I also add that we'd really like to thank Aisha for emceeing tonight. She actually found out about this gig yesterday because our director, Lucy, had to head down south with SES to help with the floods. So thank you, Aisha. Big clap for Aisha.
That's all. Thank you.
Thank you.
It's lovely to meet you.
You too.
Thank you.
I think Karen will talk to you about getting copies of the presentation.
Yeah, great.
Thanks, Bronwyn.